Hi, I'm Ryan Schwartz, the host of Architecturally Speaking. Please note that the following episode was recorded before recent changes to the OAA's licensing structure. The OAA technology program and associated membership status no longer apply. The interview still touches on several topics of interest to architects and non-architects alike. We hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome. You're listening to Architecturally Speaking, a new podcast series created by the Ontario Association of Architects. We're pulling back the curtain to explore the architecture profession, what architects do, and how their buildings affect our lives each and every day. My name is Ryan Schwartz. I'm an architect licensed in Ontario and your host for the series. And today we'll be talking with two people about accessibility in the built environment. So they not only know each other, but they're former colleagues and also really good friends. So we have Daniel Hall, who's both a licensed architect and a carpenter. For the past 14 years, he has led Collaborative Architecture, which was formerly known as the Architect Builders Collaborative, with a focus on green design, revitalizing old buildings, and improving accessibility. And we also have Greg Papp, who's an architectural technologist. He's had his own business since the mid-90s, specializing in accessibility consulting for residential builders and architects in the Toronto area called Design Vision. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much.
So you're friends and former colleagues, so maybe we'll dive into that. Where did you guys first meet?
Greg, I don't remember where we first met. It was quite a few years ago, though. I'm going to say going back 10 years.
I think you had just started your own practice, and we're looking for someone who could, who was, I wouldn't say expert, but good enough to use our BIM modeling software. So somehow we got connected, and we were chatting for quite a while the first time we met.
I remember now it was through our mutual colleague and friend, architect Jim Belisle.
Correct, yes. He and his wife, the landscape architect, the two nicest people in the world.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Exactly.
So we're talking about accessibility on this episode, and you both have some unique perspectives on this topic. And Greg, we'll maybe start with you to give some context for those people who are listening. How has accessibility played a role in your personal and professional life?
Well, I had a spinal cord injury while I was still going to architecture school at what is now known as Toronto Metropolitan University. And so I of course, have lived the experience of a person who is in need of accessibility and barrier-free paths of travel. And also, I, of course, have got somewhat of a unique perspective in that I also design and advocate for accessibility through my business as an architectural technologist.
So your professional experience has certainly been informed through your personal life. And Daniel, we've been corresponding as a group a little bit the last few days. And in one of the emails you mentioned that Greg is responsible for informing much of what you've learned about accessibility. So maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Exactly. I think like a lot of us, I thought I knew what accessible design was. You know, it was ramps and push buttons, and as an architect, code requirements that you had to meet. And it was only when I was introduced to Greg and he came to work with us on some projects that I realized what we had to do even in our own office just to take care of simple things. You know, we were in a building, elevator access building, barrier-free by code standards, push buttons and the like. And I discovered that we were on the 5th floor that Greg would have to phone when he arrived downstairs because the location of the push button was so far in the corner that he couldn't reach it to come in. to leave was fine. So he could leave on his own, but one of us had to go down 5 floors to let him in. And it just started simple things like that of suddenly realizing that something that might look perfectly good on paper and comply with the code doesn't actually serve people well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And you sort of touched on it there too. When just talking about accessible design and inclusive design, there's obviously a broad spectrum of physical disabilities that we're speaking about. And people might automatically jump to thinking about someone in a wheelchair, but what other kind of challenges are you both trying to mitigate through accessible design? Like what other kinds of challenges are we even talking about?
Well, I can give a small example. In our building, we just had the hallways renovated, and we were a year ago. I was on the committee that were choosing the materials, and one of our committee members, when we were looking at the different carpet samples, said, "Oh no, we don't want this one." She had taken courses in people who are experiencing dementia, and she said, if you have a large dark space, people with dementia may read that as a hole. So, skip that carpet and move on to the next one. There are so many examples of people who are visually impaired, people who are auditorily impaired. For just knowing what floor an elevator is on or is going to can be a challenge for visually impaired people. Just to name it.
Sorry, Greg, you mentioned auditory issues as well. And, that brings to mind for me even the simple thing of having lunch with my colleague, Fred Thompson, who is a former professor of architecture and a mentor to me. But his hearing, like a lot of elderly people, has become challenged. And I realized a lot of the very fashionable lunch spots near our office are completely inappropriate for us to have lunch unless we're the only people in the restaurant. There's just so much bounce and echo. And even if we find a place that's a little quieter, we have to choose very carefully where to sit. And so this is truly an invisible barrier that actually makes it difficult for us to go and have lunch together in a lot of places.
Yeah, and just the spectrum of challenges that people are dealing with, like you mentioned, the elderly, I think that's a great example. They might not be considered physically disabled, but I mean, someone in their 90s is probably going to prefer a ramp as opposed to a set of stairs. So there is that wide variety of challenges that people are dealing with. So, and everyone's challenges are unique. So when talking about these barriers in the built environment, are there some common barriers across some of these challenges, or some that are more prevalent than others?
Well, I think you touched on it, Ryan. You mentioned ramps. I would also say, I don't know if you have young children, but anyone who's pushed a stroller can tell you the amount of barriers there are in this city to getting around, both indoors and out. And I think this is where I think Greg introduced me to the expression curb cut, meaning not literally those curb cuts, but if I've got it right, Greg, it's an adaptation we made to the built environment to address a disability that everyone benefits from and people just take for granted. I don't think most people see curb cuts as wheelchair ramps at the side of the road, yet that's how they were introduced to us. They're just convenient.
Sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was thinking about it after we had spoken last, and I realize it's coming full circle where we now have the Internet of Things. We have an Echoes and Google Home devices, so we can use our voice to turn things on and off, answer the phone. 10 years ago, I was when in bed, I was just some days at the mercy of whether I could get through the night without having to yell at someone upstairs or somewhere else to help me out. So it's interesting how devices made for those with disabilities have had a general impact, or have had an impact on the general public. And yes, now we have designs for the masses that are having positive impacts on those in the disability community. And I think that is across the board, no matter what type of disability you have.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's so many of those little instances, what maybe it's at work or maybe it's at home, or you're trying to use public transportation where the average person is just going to not even think twice about it and just completely take things for granted, and it might completely halt someone's day and completely, they might not even be able to do what the other person is doing, right? So as architects and design professionals, obviously we want to remove these barriers. That just makes sense. I think we can all agree upon that. So what would you say the role of architects and technologists and other design professionals, what's their role, or what's our role in improving accessibility throughout, the home, the workplace, transportation?
Well, I think much in the way that people expect us to just make sure that the buildings we design are structurally sound and durable and stand up. It should be incumbent on us to be looking around and seeing things through the lens of, is this space also accessible? And not just wait for a client who says this is a requirement of ours, but bring it forward to the table, even when it isn't a requirement. I can give an example of this with a semi-public building, an organization that hosts a lot of events in their building. And it's one of these old brick and beam buildings where the lower level is about 4 feet below grade, concrete floor, and then beautiful timber floors above. And being an old building, it didn't have the same requirements to be barrier-free that a new one would have. And that 4-foot grade difference was an attempt to navigate it with a very, very temporary, very steep plywood ramp and another way through the back of like a freight lift. So they had made some attempt to accommodate it. And I remember commenting to the owner one day when I was there about how awful this condition was, this like incredibly steep ramp. I mean, we're talking a drop of 4 feet over maybe 12. I mean, you couldn't not push
Dangerous.
A stroller up it.
Yeah.
Though interestingly enough, I know Greg could drive his motorized chair up it with no problem. But I remember commenting and making the observation that something should be done, and the response came back, we know, and this brings tears to my eyes, but ramps are so ugly. I was, wow. And I thought, talk about waving the red flag in front of the bull. Tell an architect something can't be done because it's too ugly. And I took the bait. Maybe I was intentional.
Challenge accepted, right?
Exactly. And we created a structure, a sculptural landscape structure, effectively, that is a ramp. It is seating. It is a gathering space. But more importantly, it's not a space for others. It's not the alternative to where, quote unquote, normal people go. It's a space for everybody. And to me, I think that's a really important aspect of our work, that we remove that sense of othering that comes with saying the ramp's over there, the elevator's over there, it's around the corner, through the back door, go down the lane, or whatever it is. And again, I think this is something, Greg has helped bring these to my eye. I remember we had a conversation years ago, Greg, where you referred to it being the capital D in dignity being the thing we should be looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. If you are planning on including barrier-free designs in your retrofit, that, again, it doesn't in Ontario necessarily have to be barrier-free, but there are those who will definitely volunteer to do that. So try to make sure the entrance is at the front of the building, where where everyone else comes and goes. It may sound like a little thing, but entering and exiting through, say, a laneway where the garbage trucks go, it doesn't smack of dignity to me. And maybe I came to that realization when Daniel and I were talking about these different projects that we've worked on together. Sometimes it's like thinking out loud almost when we've been collaborating.
I think one of the things we can do, Ryan, and along the lines, I suppose, of educating our clients, is bring forward the possibilities that are there that improve things for everyone. So, the condition I mentioned, anyone with strollers going in and out, all the deliveries that come and go on rolling carts, they use that facility far more than people in wheelchairs do, and they all benefit from it. But, a project that Greg and I worked together on a number of years ago for a nonprofit agency, as Greg pointed out, and in old buildings in Ontario, we're generally not required to make them barrier-free in many situations, and this was one of those. And they had the opportunity where it was relatively easy. They could have made the back door going around the lane past the garbage. Oh yeah, that could work. To make the front door off of Queen Street barrier-free is the route we proposed. We went, and it involved a reasonable amount of reframing right inside the door to get grades down, and a condition that wouldn't, strictly speaking, meet code with the required depths of a landing at the top and bottom. We were short a few inches on required dimensions. And, we're working back and forth on how to do that. And it was Greg who pointed out to me, he said, yes, that is the code. In this case, we're not required to meet code. He said, having a 1,500 millimeter surface at the top instead of 1,600 millimeters is perfectly fine for most people using wheelchairs and mobility devices. And really emphasizing that, I guess, a question of, perfection could be the enemy of the good. We came up with a very good result there. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't, strictly speaking, have met the letter of the code. But as it didn't need to, it went far, far beyond what was required in that building.
I think you bring up an interesting point in that too often accessible design is thought as you're adding it in, right? It's the afterthought and you're trying to make things meet the minimum. But what about going above and beyond? Actually, there's 2 points, because you also mentioned that with older buildings and retrofits, you don't necessarily have to bring things up to the modern day codes. So I guess I have two parts here. One is when clients come to you, how often do you find, or what are they asking for with these kinds of issues? And do you find them receptive to going above and beyond requirements and minimums? And what are your experiences with clients?
Greg, do you want to start on that?
Well, I think part of a good firm's practice is seeking out the right clients. It is definitely a two-way street, and I think that went a long way to working on some of the projects that we did. Daniel mentioned that the ramp that went down 4 feet. Which is a perfect example of a curb cut, by the way, because it is a sculpture. It is a space for anybody to use. Not that I'm trying to pat you on the back all the time, but I guess, Enlightened clients, first and foremost, that they make the biggest difference.
Agreed. And I think we're quite fortunate in our practice that, a central pillar of what we stand for is sustainable design or green design. so I prefer the term. And so we attract a certain clientele who's already open and interested in that. And our definition of sustainability is quite broad. It includes beyond, the traditional environmental aspect. It's a form of economic and social sustainability, sourcing local materials, but projects that have a social impact. So it's generally not a big stretch for our clients who might be thinking about these days, their carbon footprint, but they would have been thinking about low energy buildings a few years ago, to think about how accessible it is. And in particular, we're finding with residential clients, a lot of people are now contemplating aging gracefully in place. And a whole slew of mobility issues are typically associated with that. So, we have increasingly people saying, well, can we plan for a future where I may not be able to climb stairs? And so that's becoming a much bigger part of our design work. And I think we're seeing that across the board as we all start to look around and realize that the traditional solutions to aging are not very attractive to most of us.
So I think you're both in a good position then in terms of the clients that you're working with and that are initially approaching you. And so what kind of a conversation would you have with a client who's maybe not quote unquote a good client, who you maybe just wants to do the bare minimum? How do you have that conversation and say, this is something that we should be considering, or this is the right thing to do? How do you have those tough conversations?
Ryan, am I allowed to say we fire those clients?
Of course, yeah.
No, interestingly, I had a client today raise this question with me. Due to the economics of their project, they said, would you still work with us if we stripped away a lot of the things that matter to you? And it was an interesting conversation. I said, but one of the things that matters to us is serving our clients well and meeting their needs. So, these are, I guess, much like, one is entitled when dealing with a doctor to not take their advice. I think the classic thing gets scrawled on your portfolio at a hospital is AMA, against medical advice. Similarly, one can ignore your architect's advice. But I do question why someone would engage a professional, an engineer, an architect, technologist, for our knowledge and perspective and advice, and then ignore it. It's they are difficult questions, and we believe very much that you put forward where the value is. Though we start our projects with really investigating with our clients what their values are and what is important to them. So, those things take the forefront in the design.
You're getting off on the right foot early in the process and not finding out later halfway through that, no, this isn't maybe someone I want to be working with. And along that same vein, you mentioned aging in place. We'll definitely get into that in a bit. Greg, I wanted to touch base with your building in particular. Now, I don't know much about this, but I know that you were involved early in the design process of your condo building. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. A very motivated person who had a degenerative disease, he wanted to live in his own place and still have access to care, to 24-hour care, as a matter of fact. And he found, talking about Enlightened clients, and in this case, developer, the developer was all on board, and it attracted quite a few people with disabilities who were in a similar situation, such as myself. And the architects, instead of following the code such that it was back then, and just giving them what they thought we would want, they sat down with us when the building was still in its pre-permit phase, and went through all of the public spaces, from the front door to the outdoor terrace to everywhere, And we commented on, oh, maybe that ramp is a little too steep. We know what the code says, but maybe, bring it down a bit. Okay, how are we going to navigate the elevators if we have almost no use of our hands? We came up with a fob solution there, and then we, as the building was underway, each of us went through the same process, but with our individual units, and like not including walls. That was a big one, of course, and making the bathroom barrier-free to our needs, which may not be the same needs as someone else with a disability or without. So, as far as I know, it's if it has been repeated in the city, it has not been repeated often enough. And given the number of condos we now have and will have over the next umpteen years, it would be nice to see that again. It really would.
There's a huge opportunity there because every condo that gets built these days gets something like 75% of the units pre-sold before they get financing. So I realize many of those might be investors, but many are end users. And so there is this opportunity to engage the end user in a condo building that you might not have realized there was. I certainly didn't realize until I knew Greg and, appreciated how lovely the lobby in their building is and how easy things are there, that this kind of effort was made at the pre-design stage. And I think as architects, we wouldn't normally think of that. We would take our direction either from the client or with a developer scenario. We are hired because we are experts in this particular building typology, and we are expected to bring to the table, this is what a multi-unit condo building should look like and should include. And again, I'm not aware of projects like that where there's been real consultation and engagement with the owners at the pre-construction phase. But how wonderful would that be for everybody buying a condo, not just someone with a disability?
Yeah, you nailed it. That goes right back to the idea of the curb cuts and it helps everyone. It's good. It just makes for a better building. It serves everyone better. So I couldn't agree more.
And further this building now, 20 something years later, we are, see if I can get the acronym correct, a naturally occurring retirement community, NORC, not the nicest sounding acronym. And and that is all from the back in 1997 when we were sitting there with that architect. Everything's in place. Even the caregivers are in place. And you could even stretch it to say it touches on sustainability because people don't have to move. They don't have to take up space in long-term care facilities, possibly. There are just so many advantages to it from beginning through, let's call it middle age, now that it's, in its 20s, the building that is. It should be thought of in a much longer span of time. What is not only the use of the building, I mean, that's pretty obvious. What are the uses of the occupants of the building as well?
And then you take away some of the need for future renovations because these things are already in place. So you're saving some headache and costs and things down the line, which is great too. And so this has come up a couple times now, this idea of aging in place and being able to age gracefully, into your later years in the same house or condo or whatever it is. So for those people at home that are listening, what can they do to their say they're renovating their house or their condo, or they're building something new, what can they do to make sure that their building is accessible for themselves and also down the line for future generations?
One of the simplest moves, if you are renovating, it's quite simple to plan for larger doors. So we can keep all our doors, we can stay within a standard 3-foot door that isn't in a commercial building, again, wouldn't meet code requirement for accessibility, but they're readily available at the lumberyard without a cost premium. And so that simple move, if you're moving walls around, slightly wider corridors, a little more room in the bathroom, these are things that you'll just appreciate when you have them without thinking about what's the reason behind them. So it depends on the degree of renovation, and an obvious one as well is, can we avoid steps in and out of the building? And what we always encourage clients, if we're renovating, say, older homes, is think about how, because they're usually multi-level homes, think about how you might be able to live on a single floor. And this situation can arise as simple as hip replacement surgery and needing a number of weeks of recovery. And the difference between being able to recover in your own home with family versus in a rehab facility. And that difference is simply perhaps having a shower on that main floor and a room which could fit a bed if it needed to.
When you think of the cost of staying at a long-term care facility for a few weeks, that might offset the exact same cost as doing those upgrades to your own home anyway. So there's certainly some trade-offs there. So how is this all implemented? And we've touched on this a little bit with building code and AODA, and we can take the conversation kind of in either of those directions. Greg, I know you were involved early in that process. So how are these standards implemented in our buildings and our everyday lives? Where does this stuff come from?
I was fortunate enough to be a member of the, if I can remember all of the more acronyms, essentially I was part of council that I looked at the built environment, and from the perspective of someone with a disability, and we were able to expand on that stereotype of the paraplegic with the strong upper body and the manual chair that can reach those door openers that are in the wrong spot, as Daniel was pointing out at the beginning. And taking a look at water fountains. If you're in a chair, of course you want it lower. If you are a child, you would like it lower. But okay, what if you're a senior with a bad back? You don't want to be stooping way down there. So the solution we came up with was simply, and you'll see them, or I hope you see them everywhere, 2 fountains, one higher, one lower. And it's just one small example. And I think much of the work that we did for about 2 or 3 years ended up as part 3.8 of the building code, which is the all to do with barrier-free path of travel. And then anything outside of a building, like in a park or any other setting similar to that, it landed in a reference guide for open spaces, for pathways and sandboxes and all of the things that we think of, as if we're going to a park. Having a picnic table with one end open so a person in a wheelchair could sit there, for example.
And some of these are, as Greg said, in the building code or the design of public space guidelines with the AODA. So a number of them are required in certain circumstances. But it's frankly, I guess, surprising, maybe it shouldn't be, how many exemptions there are to when it's required. And this is definitely an Ontario approach. Our colleagues in New York State have much more rigorous standards there about when, a restaurant in an old building in Manhattan has to be barrier-free. You're putting a restaurant in, you have to do it. In Toronto, as soon as your building's more than 8 inches above grade, you don't have to do anything to it. So, it is possible. Cities like New York make it work. Here we have the stopgap solution that arises out of it, that Luke Anderson and the Stopgap Foundation have come up with these, great plywood ramps you see all over the city now, but they literally are a stopgap solution because our rules don't require it. So I think you'll see times when people just recognize there's a problem to be solved and step up and start solving it. Another one, I don't think it came out of an issue for accessibility, but many people these days are familiar with up-down sit-stand desks and the motorized version. When we got our first one, what a blessing it was, because Greg would come to our office to work sometimes 1 or 2 days a week, and we'd have to have little rigged up extra legs that we would lift up the table, the desk that he was working at, to the right height for his chair to slide under it. And then when he was gone and someone else was using it for a few days, we'd lower it down. We did this every day, beginning and end of each day, and then discovered one of the early, somewhat affordable powered desks and said, this is the thing. And, once we got one, I looked at it and said, wow, well, I want one of those. And I got one for myself because I've spent a lot of my working life, as a carpenter before becoming an architect, on my feet. So I'm just more comfortable often at a desk on my feet, period. And so these things, I think people don't just take them for granted in offices now. It's the norm of the new office that you have sit-stand desks, but what a difference it makes for all sorts of forms of accessibility.
Absolutely. And I should mention, we've mentioned the AODA a few times, and I don't know if we actually spelled that acronym out. So it's the Accessibility for Ontario, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So people can check that out for more. And speaking of definitions, I have one quick one here. So, and definitions in the building code, things like barrier-free, accessible, and universal in terms of maybe washrooms. These get tossed around a lot. Are these the same thing or are they different?
How long do you have to go into it, Ryan? They are different.
We're getting near the end here, so
they are different. There are lots of overlap, but a universal washroom is usually what we are looking for, and it includes facilities for a whole range of people's needs, including, if you actually build it out, an adult-sized change table, because there are adults who need change tables, not just infants. And that's one you seldom actually see installed.
Okay, good to know. And then that will bring us now to the rapid fire portion of our questions here. So these are nice and quick and simple, and feel free to just jump in with the first answer that comes to mind here. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how messy is your desk right now, whether it's a sit-stand desk or not?
11.5. I don't know. There is not a surface on my desk that's not covered with a wire. It's unbelievable. It looks like some kind of a stereo exploded and landed on my desk.
What about you, Daniel?
Mine's a 5, but I tidied up behind the camera because, get in the image.
Fair enough. Any favorite buildings or cities to visit in terms of architecture?
In Toronto, one of my favorite spaces is, I'm going to get its name wrong because they change it, but the Galleria. I'll always know it as the Galleria. The Calatrava designed atrium space that connects Yonge to Bay Street. I love the exuberance of it. I love the fact that, it gives this impression that the structure is just had to be this way, but it's also sculptural. It's both. It's this beautiful marriage of form and function and sculpture and play and practicality, and lets us see the faces of the heritage buildings in a new way that are cleaned up. And this incredible contrast between the new and old. And I'd have to say, I'm not sure that the new wins always, but that building does.
Sure.
That's a good answer, and bonus points for Ontario there. So how about you, Greg? Any favorite buildings or cities in terms of architecture?
Well, I guess I have explored my own the most with my hobbies, photography. It really gets me out there. But I mean, you can't ignore like Seville or Barcelona with their ancient, Barry Gothic center of Barcelona, for example. These medieval streets that are crooked with houses or buildings a couple of feet from the curb. It's just an overwhelming experience. And
It's a great.
they I guess just coincidentally have been referred to as the most barrier-free city in the world. Barcelona, you wouldn't think.
Perfect.
But
Well,
that's what it takes. A World Fair and an Olympics almost back to back. Our city changed overnight when we hosted the Pan Am Games. I went from waiting for over an hour if I was lucky to get a cab to calling one and having it parked outside my front door before I even had a chance to get down to the lobby. And the examples in the built environment are endless.
that's a fitting choice then. I like that. And the next question here. So no budget or building code constraints. What would you change about your house or apartment, condo, whatever it may be?
In my house, my pet peeve is where I put my wood stove, thinking it would be much hotter and not comfortable to sit beside. So it would move to where the Christmas tree resides at Christmas time.
And Greg, I guess you've kind of had a chance to actually do this with your building, so maybe.
Well, currently,
Is there anything
take the whole
that
building
you change now?
move it, rotate it to the right, because it's just too close to the one north of me. No, I think it's something impossible, but a higher ceiling would be nice. Having a wood stove would be nice. Obviously not practical. Yeah, so many.
Good answers. All right, the next one. Fill in the blank. The best buildings are blank. And I don't think we can use accessible here today. That's too easy.
Alive.
Good choice. Greg, any thoughts?
You stole it, Daniel. I cannot think of a better word.
Yeah, we can double up. That's okay. And the last one here, are there any favorite architectural resources that you recommend for someone listening? They could be books, documentaries, websites, groups, anything of that sort?
Something that's...
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, I was trying to think of something that's not too dry. If you're willing to go to the CMHC website, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, I think most people know that one. They have a load of publications for the non-professional about aging in place and simple guidelines like planning for the future, stack up some closets. So if you ever need an elevator in your home, you can use those closets that go from basement to, say, your second floor, and not have to rip apart your, some place that you would just take up more space. Tons of tips like that.
That's great.
I was going towards the more conventional architectural eye candy, and I would say, I don't know how to pronounce it, arkitzer.com.
Okay, yep.
As one of those sites. But I think Greg's got a much better answer.
Those are both great. Those are both fantastic. So that wraps up this episode of Architecturally Speaking. We've been chatting with Greg Papp and Daniel Hall. Thanks both for sharing your time and your expertise and your experience. If people want to get in touch, is there a best place that people can do that for both of you?
Well, my pleasure, Ryan, and thank you for having us. For us, our website is very simply TABC, as in Toronto, abc.ca, and lots of links and connections there. And we could connect you to Greg as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Anything you'd like to share, Greg?
Well, I don't have any time to build a website. Wish I could. But simply get in touch with me with my email address, which is greg@designvision.ca.
Perfect. That's fantastic. So we'll be recording many more episodes of Architecturally Speaking over the coming weeks and months. If you have questions about architecture, or you know someone who might make a great guest, or you just want to offer some feedback, you can send us an email at podcast@oaa.on.ca. You can also visit the OAA's website at oaa.on.ca for more information on all things related to architecture in Ontario. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a glowing review and share it with your friends. This will help us create some more episodes in the future. Architecturally Speaking is available wherever you get your podcasts and also on the OAA's YouTube channel. Be sure to check that out for the full video of this episode. And be sure to like and subscribe so you're notified when the next episode comes out. And until next time, I'm Ryan Schwartz, and this is Architecturally Speaking.